So the case study that I have decided to analyse and explain how I would go through is the second case study, which is about an under-17 elite triathlete called Becca. She's 15 years old and is aiming to be selected for the Great Britain team in the coming months. She recently had a fall from a bike, and this seems to have affected her confidence, and she's struggling with training and racing because of that. This information was provided to me by her coach, who came to me for support for Becca. So in terms of the initial consultation, I think it's important for me to have a checklist, because Kahneman suggests that algorithms in decision making are important, and state that over 300 studies show that algorithms are better at decision making when in unpredictable situations. And because a consultation with Becca would be unpredictable, because I'm not sure how she's going to react, not sure of her previous experiences, I'm not sure how she's going to fit in with me. This is an unpredictable environment, so for the first part of the session, I think it's important for me to follow a checklist. So the key things that I would make sure to discuss with Becca would be my consulting philosophy, and this is enjoyment. I feel like the main reason athletes and just people in general perform or undertake sporting activities, physical activity, is because they enjoy doing it, especially at an elite level. You're not going to train as much as you need to do to get to an elite level unless you enjoy doing it. So I discussed this with Becca and suggest that my main aim for her is for her to get back enjoying the sport, which seems to be an issue currently, from what I've been told, because she's struggling in training and racing. So we want to get her back enjoying training and racing, so that, and hopefully, the enjoyment will lead to better performance. So the second point that I would discuss on my checklist would be ethical and moral principles. So I would make sure that I have consent from Becca. This is a difficult one because she's 15, so I think I would need to have her parents, or one parent or guardian there, because she's under 18. But if she feels more comfortable being on her own, maybe just have a guardian parent in attendance, and then we'd be able to discuss if that's what she feels more comfortable with. But there'd need to be somebody else there because she's under 18. And as well, I've been approached by the coach, so I'm not 100% sure if I've got consent from Becca and how much she actually wants to be there. So that would be discussed. Data storage and confidentiality will definitely be discussed. So I'd make sure that Becca knows that all of the things that are discussed, all of the notes that I make, will not be shared with anybody. They'll stay between me and her, and I won't put a name anywhere. I'll keep her confidential, and this could be done by using a number as her ID, something like that. And yeah, I'd just make sure that she knows that I would not share any notes or anything that has been discussed in the session with anybody, and it would only be shared if she wants me to. So, like, for example, if she wants something to be shared with the coach so that it helps with training, this can be done. So the last point on my checklist would be level of expertise, because I feel like as a consultant, I wouldn't want to work with a client that I'm not comfortable working with, in terms of I don't know the sport well enough, and I feel like for Becca, for example, she wouldn't want to work with me if I didn't know a lot about triathlons, or enough to help her get back to enjoying the sport. So that's a big thing for me. If this checklist is met, then I would move on to a needs analysis. But firstly, the main questions that I would ask to Becca in these opening stages of the consultancy would be, I start with, "Hi Becca, my name is Tim. How are you doing today?" And I feel like this would just get her to open up a bit and make it feel like more of a friendly environment, so that she feels more comfortable talking about more personal issues, or getting down to the root cause of the issues further down the line. And I think it also um, makes it clear that I actually care about what she has to say and her life, and her issues, which is fundamentally what I need for her to open up. So the next one, tell me a bit about yourself. This follows the same sort of pathway. Um, it just gets to talking about her life in general, not just sport, and this can help identify the root cause if it's not actually sporting related. And this links in with the next question again. Tell me a bit about your day-to-day life. So it's just aiming to get an overall perspective of her life and how she is on a day-to-day basis, what other interests she has, um, friendships, relationships, stuff like this. Because although we've been told that the fall off the bike is the thing that's affecting Becca's training and racing, it might actually be something completely different. So I'd then move on to asking about sports and this. How did you get into triathlons as a sport, and tell me about your journey to date. I just feel like this would get her talking more about the sport in general, how she feels about the sport, how um, her aspirations, stuff like this, and if it is truly something she enjoys. I feel like this would be evident in this in this discussion point, and if it isn't, again, it would be evident, and I'd be able to move forward on either basis. Um, so the second to last point I think I'd make is that I know the reasoning for her being here, but it's only from the coach. So I'd make sure that she actually wants to be here for a start, and um, I would also this would also enable me to get her perspective on the situation, um, how much she thinks the falls affected her, um, and yeah, it would also give me some insight into the relationship between her and her coach, which is a big relationship to have knowledge about. So I think for the last point as well, I'd make sure that Becca knows that she can stop at any time, because um, there might be some stressful or harmful situations, especially when we're discussing sensitive topics such as the fall. So moving on to the needs analysis, from these initial questions, I can start to form different opinions and thoughts. But the first technique that I would use in the actual needs analysis would be psychological profiling. Um, Butler and Hardy are the ones who came up with this, and it's a client-centered performance assessment strategy which encourages athletes to reflect upon key qualities that are likely to perform for them to perform well in their particular sport. So in this case, triathlon. Um, results can be used for goal setting and, importantly, structuring training. So again, this goes back to Becca and her coach's relationship. This would help the training philosophies, and um, yeah, also the benefits include self-awareness, intrinsic motivation, and confidence, which do seem to be issues that Becca is struggling with, looking at the information that we have. So how I would do this with Becca, during the session, she would be provided with a sheet of paper which would include a number of statements, a number of qualities, should I say, that are to do with the sport of triathlon, but also general statements. So, for example, a few that I would include would be confidence, cardiovascular fitness, strength, running technique, bike technique, um, emotional control, um, bike handling, and I think the bike ones would be very important to to note, because this seems to be the issue from the information that we've got. I think it'll be it's important also that to note that Becca would be rating each of these qualities on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, for example, I do not have confidence, and 10 being I have a lot of confidence. And I think I would ensure Becca that there's no time restraint to doing this, so that she doesn't feel any pressure when completing the form. And I think this would help getting better results for that. So I feel like there could be some ethical issues here. The main one being protection from harm, because this fundamentally gets Becca to think about her emotional state at different points of triathlon. So in terms of like specific bike handling, this is going to get her thinking about the fall that she had, and it might affect her mentally. So I would make sure that she knows that she can stop at any time. Like she doesn't have to go through with it. And also the fact that the psychological profiling sheet would be a self-report technique. This might create issues such as demand characteristics, which I would try to control as much as possible in terms of not giving too much information, just explaining how to go through filling the form and briefly saying what it's about. And then I would also make sure that the sheet doesn't have anything on there that makes it clear that what I'm trying to study, and I would stay far away while she's doing it to ensure that she doesn't get any feedback from me. So the second technique that I would use for a needs analysis would be sports analysis, which suggested by O'Donoghue. And sport analysis is essential for coaches, athletes, sports organisations, researchers, psychologists, everybody involved in a sports setting, because it analyses the physical, technical, and psychological demands of a sport. And I feel like this technique also links back to the psychological profiling, because that one analyses the emotional connection with the different demands and situations in a sport, but the sport analysis specifically analyses these demands and characteristics from a sporting point of view. So firstly, performance statistics, sports performance analysis, such as results from a clock or a score on a results card from a football match, help to gain a good understanding about the actual sport itself. This was suggested by Sam Peo. So this would be discussed with Becca. There's a few main points that I discuss with her, whether it's a team or individual sport, and obviously in this case, it's an individual sport. So I'd discuss this with her in terms of how, and this would link back to the psychological profiling, because in individual sports, lots of key attributes are important, such as confidence and so like confidence is a big point for an individual sport, because it's just you out there performing, so you've got to have a lot of belief in yourself. So this links back to the psychological profiling, because Becca would be able to see what what is demanded from the actual sport, and how she views herself in an emotional state, and we can then see how these differ, and the different areas that I need to work on with her. So, so in terms of more sport analysis points that I would um, get Becca to discuss is a closed or open sport. So for triathlon, this would be an open sport because all three of the events can be affected by the environment, seasons or campaigns. So for triathlons, for Becca, there is World Championships, there is the Olympics, all these different competitions throughout the year. So how training and emotions can be structured around these competitions, and so like frequency of competitions is the next point, and um, this would be an important statistic to have because athletes need to get into quite a high emotional state when at a big competition. If there's a lot of these, that might be too much for her. The type of activity and fitness required, so the strength, aerobic endurance, precision, flexibility, all these things, and I keep saying this, but this definitely links back to the psychological profiling, where I would see how she rates herself and say cardiovascular fitness, because this would be high in triathlon sport analysis, and if she rates herself as low at this is something we need to work on. Becca, after I've done these sort of analysis, these points, I would also discuss the details of what equipment she uses. So obviously, I imagine she'd be using a watch to track bike rides, runs, swims, stuff like that. Um, and this is important to know because um, these smartwatches often link to social media, stuff like that, and this can have an effect on mental capacity a lot because she can get indulged or um, overwhelmed by certain things. But that's obviously an outside point, but it would be important to note because she might be affected by that emotionally. So once the needs analysis has been done, I would then create an intervention, and I feel like there's three key um, psychological skills that would help Becca in terms of the situation that she's in. So in terms of psychological skills training, this was first discussed by Weinberg and Williams, 2001. So the first technique that I would use with Becca is imagery, and I would get her to imagine herself cycling. So in terms of, I would I would help her. I would get her to imagine getting on the bike, clipping the pedals on, riding smoothly down the road, gently stopping by pressing the brakes, and I would um, encourage you to bring in all the senses when doing the imagery technique, as this would heighten the experience and make it a better um, real life fit for her, and she's more likely to then translate this into real life. The second one would be self talk. And for Becca, I would get her to come up with just a couple of phrases that would be meaningful to her, and this would help her stay controlled and focused during training and during racing. And I feel like this would be good for her because she's quite young, and it doesn't take a lot of um, thought or practice. All she'd have to do would be come up with these phrases, and then she can repeat it when she's feeling overwhelmed or struggling with anxiety. And I think for these phrases, an example might be, "I am a good bike rider," when she starts worrying about how she's going to perform when she's riding her bike, something like that. And then the final one would be goal setting. Um, I feel like a number of process goals would be good for how she's doing for when she's doing the interventions, as this would help her track progress see if she's actually doing it right. So for providing information back to Becca, I would provide a brief overview of the process that we've gone through. So the different needs analysis that I've gone through, not too much, not to overwhelm her, but I'd explain it briefly. And then, so like the psychological profiling of identified traits that she's viewed as lacking, sports analysis, I've identified key traits and demands of triathlon and compared both of these to create an intervention. And then I would provide Beck with a step-by-step guide on how to undertake these psychological skills. So I'd make sure that that I go through with the psychological skills with her and make sure that she knows what she's doing. And then I would also give her instructions on how to do these so that she can look back when she's struggling herself at home. And I'd also give her a progress chart, and these would include things such as so the process goes as I mentioned earlier. So, for example, imagining riding your bike smoothly and without interruption for 10 seconds, and then once you've done that a few times, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on. And in terms of the self-talk phrase, maybe repeat it once, and then twice, and then 3 times. So, yeah, I think that would help Becca very much, and she would benefit from those techniques. So, yeah, that is how I would go through that scenario with Becca and help her to get back into competing and enjoying the sport of triathlon again.
Which cognitive bias or heuristic do you think might be most likely to impair the decision-making of the practitioner in this case study scenario, and why?
So in my opinion, this would be narrative fallacy, which is the tendency to put a series of events into a story, and then this story would then explain the events. So my reason for this would be because of the techniques used within the needs analysis. So the first one being psychological profiling. I feel like it would be quite easier to see the traits here that are low, and then it would be quite easy to make a story out of these, and then use them to suggest why she's performing badly. She is in Becca, is performing badly in training and racing. So, for example, Becca might rate herself low in confidence or emotional intelligence, decision making, stuff like this, and this might be taken by the practitioner as the fall has created her to be low in these traits, and then therefore these traits are making her struggle in training and racing. But the case might be just that she's poor at bike handling or has a poor bike like cycling technique. So it's important to look at the whole picture rather than just looking at the individual traits that might fit in with the story. I do think that using the sport analysis alongside the psychological profiling helps cut out heuristic as much as it can be, because it helps identify the actual needs of the sport, and then matching this up with the psychological profiling that Becca will have done helps identify which ones are both low and which ones are both high. So there should be, and this should help interventions to be made that are definitely right for Becca. So yeah, next question.
What do you consider the key ethical issues a practitioner should consider when working with this client?
So I think that practitioners, especially like Rebecca, should consider all ethical issues, but the main ones for me, firstly, is informed consent. So in the initial consultation, the consent will be assumed because the coaches actually um, approached me for this interview. Um, so I would make sure that um, consent is got by Becca herself, um, because we don't know that if she actually wants to be there, because the coach was the first one to get in touch. Protection from harm is another big one, because if she has experienced a fall and this is recent and affecting her badly, um, the thoughts that we might be getting to get back to, like on the psychological profiling, might um, cause her to experience some harm. But this leads on to the next um, ethical issue that I would definitely say is a big one for Becca's scenario, which is the right to withdraw, and she would always be, like I said, in how I would go through this, she would always be ensured that she has the right to withdraw, so that if she is experiencing any stress, she's able to stop at any time. She knows she can stop at any time. And I think the final one for Becca's scenario um, would be confidentiality, and this goes for um, any consultancy, or when you're working with any client. Um, the details and whatever's said in the session should always remain confidential, because they're sensitive subjects and topics, and you owe it to the client that for none of these to get out. So yeah, they're the key ethical issues that I think Becca's scenario um, will have in them. So yeah.